Good morning, Bucknutters. It is Monday, March the 13th. I am Dan Rubin. This is the Bucknuts Morning 5 and Change. If you're expected to see the lovely visage of Dave Biddle, Dave is on break today. Is he dealing with his tournament bracket hangover? We don't really know. It's always possible. We don't ask here. We're totally trusting of our staff. And as you can see, we are totally trusting of the great Patrick Murphy, who has gotten up early to join us, and we appreciate that. So, Pat and I apologize coming to you a bit late. Pat, having a good Monday?
So far, so good. I'll try and live up to Dave. I think he's just starting spring break early. That's my.
He's rounding off the edges.
Yeah, down
he's
in Panama.
The guy that he gets the he's the guy who's smart enough to schedule Thanksgiving weekend off in advance, so he buys himself a couple extra free days. Sometimes that's you got to wonder where the commands are coming from in that house, but we'll assume it's Dave for purposes of this television show or combination YouTube, whatever this thing is actually morphed into. But we rarely start with basketball, and we will today because it was the end of basketball for the Ohio State Buckeyes. They made a valiant run in the Big Ten tournament. I think any reasonable fan should be happy with that performance, given where they were entering the tournament. I think you could pan back and take shots at the team and do whatever you want, but it was a strong finish. Thankfully, probably around guys that we will see again. Put a bow on. You spent a lot of time with this team, and it was one of the rougher seasons in recent memory that I think will have a decent aftertaste, if that makes any sense, just because the way it finished with some young guys, but kind of put a bow on everything, what you thought of it, where they go from here. And then, like I said, don't give that one answer that I'm going to ask you up at the end.
Yeah, I think, look, this was a tough season. It was tough for fans to watch. It was tough for Steve and I to cover, and I'm sure everyone else who covered this team. It was tough for the players. It was tough for the coaches. I've talked to a number of coaches who just, tried to figure out what was going on throughout the year and never had real answers. So to have a run here at the end, and the Big Ten tournament, obviously great, but the last few games of the season, and even that loss up at Michigan State, they played pretty well. I think that at least lets you have a better taste in your mouth going into the offseason. We got done with that game against Purdue. They did the post-game press conference, and then we were waiting outside the locker room to talk to Roddy Gale, and Chris Holtman and a couple of the assistants were out there. And look, they weren't happy that the season was over, but they were definitely proud of what they were doing and just kind of standing around talking to them. It was obvious that, look, they knew that this team should have been playing closer to what we saw these last few weeks throughout most of the season. I think some of it had to do with the growth of the freshmen, but you also just never had the consistent play of the veterans that we saw here kind of late. Obviously, tired legs affected this team, or else maybe they make a run to Sunday and perhaps we're talking about a tournament run further. But I think it's good to kind of sail off into the sunset with this group, knowing that it was a bad year, but that it ended at least on a positive note. I think that way Buckeye fans can have a more positive remembering of some of these guys. And then the guys, as you mentioned, that are coming back, there's something to build on next year, as opposed to, look, if they'd lost Wednesday night to Wisconsin, you really go into the offseason with, okay, where do these guys go from here? They weren't able to do anything as freshmen, So at least you started to see something, the emergence of a guy like Roddy Gale, obviously Bruce Thornton, Felix Okpara getting minutes at the end. So I think that's certainly a positive to build on this offseason, and then once next year gets rolling.
I think definitely if you were going to say what has happened the last 3 weeks to a month, obviously Bruce Thornton has emerged. I do think it's kind of ridiculous that we love Thornton because we think he's good enough to be really good and not leave. Seriously, that's why people love him. Yeah. They love the fact that he's a bulldog and he's a competitor, but they also they aren't threatened by the fact that he's going to leave for the NBA. So, but I think Roddy Gale's emergence, That backcourt, building on that backcourt heading into next year, certainly gives you a little bit of a foundation. There was a time when you would think maybe an all sophomore backcourt would be young, but good gracious, I'd have to do the math. But when you talk about the experience they got this year, they're probably one of the more experienced backcourts coming back in the conference next year based on total starts. That's how transient it is. And you don't know what the team's going to look like based on the transfer portal. But they're in a little bit of a tough spot in that they weren't good enough this year to keep Bryce Sensabaugh down enough to not show enough to leave. I do think he's leaving. And I would just encourage everybody to view this in two separate planes. If you're going to comment on Bryce Sensabaugh and his NBA aspirations, one is he ready to contribute in the NBA, which is literally irrelevant. And two is, will he get drafted if he gets his name into the draft? And that he will. So this argument, I had an argument with who was my college roommate. When did Greg and Mike come out? What year was that?
07?
Okay. Daquan Cook was on that team.
Yep.
He was also on their AAU team. He's probably one of the better players ever to come out of the Gem City here. He was buried by the end of the year at Ohio State. He wasn't even playing. And I would tell people, like, he's leaving. And they was like, he didn't play. There's no way. And it's like, you're confusing your ability to watch the games and what you think is going to happen with real life. That's not what goes on here. If there's a desire to go into by the way, Daquan was right. He went to the NBA, had a fine career. He's doing great work in the AAU area around here. He won a 3-point contest. Now, was it the best he could have been? Maybe not. But if guys have a chance to leave and get picked, they're going to leave. I'm not even saying Sensabaugh will survive or thrive. I haven't even put that past that, but that has nothing to do with it. So let's not have, we're going to have long threads about he's not ready. He'll get played into the G League. Branham spent most of the year in the G League. He's come up and do a Malachi Branham. Nobody thought Malachi Branham was a one and done. Let's take it like this. They will bring back Bruce Thornton, Roddy Gale, like you said, Felix Opara, Justice Suing. Boy, he had a rough last month. But I would say for Justice Suing, seems like a great kid and stuff. That's what you get when you try and play someone as your go-to guy who's not a go-to guy. He's just not talented enough to play that role. There were many times a shot looked like it should have gone in, and it didn't down the stretch. He didn't take bad shots. He's just not a great player. Those shots probably should have been Malachi Branham's. He's on the Spurs.
Yep.
So just like Bryce Sensabaugh got shots he shouldn't have gotten, now you're going to lose Bryce Sensabaugh. So we'll see how that goes. I do think the talent will be better next year just because you said about experience. They have some guys coming in. I don't look at the class coming in and see anybody who's a day one starter. I'm not even sure I see any day one major contributors. I could be wrong. Your thoughts on the class coming in, and then finish it off with your starting a lineup when next season kicks off.
Yeah, Steve and I, when we were in Chicago this week, talked about that class a just decent amount. And, Steve spends more time out on the hoops recruiting trail than I do. So it was some good insight. And look, he said a guy like Taysom Chapman is a guy who could come in and handle the ball for them. He thinks he's ready. Now, he shouldn't have to do that a ton because of Bruce Thornton, and what we saw from Roddy Gale is kind of that secondary ball handler, but he believes he's a guy who's ready to do that. Devin Royal, I think, is interesting because he's probably the most obvious guy to step in and play a big role, because of how good he is. He's making a run in a state tournament, had another good game just the other day.
Yesterday, I watched it.
Yeah, but there's also going to be an opportunity there in terms of that spot, that kind of number 3, number 4 combo spot there. So he's probably the one of those guys that might have the opportunity to play a big role. We'll see how they handle Zed Key next year, and obviously what happens with the shoulder surgery. It sounds like everything's going to be fine. You just never know. And maybe that opens some minutes from Austin Parks if Zed Key plays some more at the 4. I don't know how that would work, but Chris Holtman's talked about it. But yeah, Devin Royal's the one that I think could potentially just because of the opportunity come in and have a bigger role. I mean, they're going to need these guys to play. There's no doubt about that. Just given the numbers, they'll definitely hit the transfer portal to some degree to kind of fill in there like they did this past season. But you're going to need the freshmen, maybe not quite as much as you did this past year. Hopefully,
Oh,
not as much as
good
you did this
Lord.
past year. Yeah, but
If
these
the
guys will have
freshmen start as much next year,
yeah.
we're going to have to open up a new board for Holtman. It won't even fit on the front row. It'll be the Holtman row. I don't know what it'll be, but he will not like it. I think you make a good point there, Chapman. I could see it. So I know Royal a little bit, and I misspoke. It was Saturday. I'm a day off here. Pick Central versus Olentangy Orange, which is a very good team. Senior laden, several scholarship guys going Division II, and Royal was the difference in the game. He's just too big and too athletic for teams that don't have a matchup for him. So down the stretch, you know how hard it is to get a defensive rebound against a team with guys like that, and he was spectacular. He's got a real nice face-up game. He had probably a 2 or 3 minute stretch where he hit 4 or 5 just catch and turn and face 15, 16 footers and drained them easily. He kind of has a little bit of a EJ Liddell game, if you were going to say it that way, kind of an undersized interior player that can shoot it a little bit. I think he's probably 6'7", but plays kind of a power forward spot right now. I think you can do that in the Big Ten. He's going to be a little undersized, so there could be a change. There's one thing you notice when you see the Big Ten is everybody's big. All the teams are right size, and even Northwestern's putting, a 6'4", 215-pound shooting guard out there. Maybe he might not be the quickest guy, but the one thing about the Big Ten is it's big and strong. So there can be a little bit of an adjustment time for less physically developed freshmen. I don't think Royal will have that issue because he's kind of jacked. And make sure you check out the game this weekend. They will play in the state semifinals at the great University of Dayton Arena against Centerville, which is the way the state tournament works and rotates. That was actually the state championship game last year. I thought the key to the Pick Central team last year was the great Sonny Styles. He's gone. So Royal has kind of carried them back there by himself against a Centerville team that has Gabe Cupps committed to Indiana. But the guy you want to watch for Buckeye fans is Jonathan Powell, a 6'5" shooting guard on Centerville, who's probably the most prototype NBA-style shooting guard to come through the state in a while now. He has an offer from Ohio State. They are the warm school. He's got a tremendous amount of potential. Yeah, was at Chaminade Julienne last year and changed to Centerville. They basically did the George Washington III for John Powell's flip. Both are still alive, by the way, so we will see. All right, that's a lot of hoops. We're going to take a quick break here at the 13-minute mark so I can pay some podcast bills, come back and talk football. All right, we're back. Let's actually finish off some hoops talk here with this. Spider Sillery, one of our best. Pat, can NIL keep sensible?
I don't think so.
Me either.
As you said it earlier, like these guys go. I mean, how often, if you're a first round guy, even a fringe lottery guy, it's so rare to see them come back these days. NIL might help in some degree, but look, he's a scorer. He'll score at the NBA level. He may have to, like you said earlier, go to the G League to work on some of his other things.
He has the potential. That's all you need.
Yeah, right.
The idea that you need something more than legitimate potential is faulty. And listen, there have been plenty of times and plenty of games where he has hit shots when I guarantee if you're a real basketball fan, you've said to yourself, damn. He's got a certain release for a guy that size. Most guys that are built like that don't have that touch he has. He's a special scorer. So you give him credit for getting him here. And then maybe you can buy his jersey if he goes to the Cavs or, in your case, the Lakers. He'll be on the Lakers eventually like every other player is. Let's move on to football. We'll talk some Justin Fields at the end there. That was a very cool weekend for him.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the current team. They are on spring break. They are not at the Sandpiper Inn in Panama City, Florida, according to my son. Although I wait up every night and check Life 360 to make sure he's back in the hotel room before I go to sleep. I'm that kind of dad. So I digress. But what's your vibe after the first week? It's kind of an interesting thing where they kind of get all back and everything gets rolling, and they kind of cut it off and take a break, kind of a hurry up and chill. After the first week, I'm not going to be silly enough to be like, hey, who's leading the quarterback battle? But your general sense of the squad, were there some things that surprised you? I'll tell you one thing that I'm not going to say it surprised me, but I'm a fan of listening to Jim Knowles talk during his press conferences because I think he's a little bit too honest for a coach. He actually answers questions. I don't know what he's doing out there. He's actually giving out information that you can use and go forward with, which is he's got to take Coach Speak 403. I think he's only through Coach Speak 312. But he said, I find it very interesting, the dynamic with the linebackers and that the decision of Steele, Chambers, and Tommy Eichenberg to come back essentially set C.J. Hicks back a year. I think they had an idea of him penciled in there. And then you also hear him talk about Sonny Styles and know this. Sonny Styles is going to play football for this team a lot. He's going to be deployed rather than utilized. Does that make sense? I thought that was very interesting that he addressed the idea that CJ was such a heralded player and probably wasn't going to get the burn expected. And that Sonny, they're going to make concessions for. Not concessions, but just simply because there's not the log jam at his spot. What did you make of that? And just your thoughts on those two kind of emerging. Because to me, if we're talking about Ohio State taking the next step as a defense, it's those types of guys stepping into the werewolf type roles.
Completely agree. Sonny Styles, I mean, I don't know how you don't have the kid on the field. He was part of their plan for the college football playoff semifinal. I think that tells you enough. He was going to the tight end Washington for Georgia before he gets hurt. Like he was just going to match up with one of the better tight ends in the country, and they were going to trust him to do that. So you see what they think of Sonny Styles, a kid who should be coming into his first year at Ohio State.
Right.
I think with CJ Hicks, it's interesting, as you mentioned, because of the guys coming back. If they're going to get him on the field, it's going to have to be either in a rotational sense or they're going to have to get creative. Jim Knowles said he could be a candidate to play that jack position. They're not going to do a ton with that this spring, but they do still want that to be a part of this offense. Or that defense, sorry. I think it will be interesting to see what he could do. I mean, such an athletic guy. The one thing that stood out to me when Jim Knowles was talking to CJ Hicks was he said if you give him a direction, he can go from one place to another the way you need him to. So, I think there's still some development they see in him that maybe and probably because he just didn't play much his freshman year, wasn't on the field at all defensively. They're still working through playing at this level. And, if you followed CJ Hicks in high school, he did a lot of different things for his defense. He wasn't always just playing linebacker. So still working at that position. Look, though, he's too talented to not be involved this year, similar to Sonny Styles. So those two guys, I think for sure, have to be a part of this. You don't recruit those guys to sit on the bench for 2 years. They're just, you don't have the depth of talent like at the receiver room or at running back on defense right now. So you've got to get your best players on the field, figure out a way, and those are two of them. That's
definitely what I was hoping you'd say, figure it out, man.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Their defense was not in a position to be beggars can't be choosers. I mean, that's a little rude, but we need to get the dude on the field. That's for sure. I will say this. The more I do a little research and talk to people and stuff, I think they absolutely crushed it in the transfer portal with Davison Igbinosun from Ole Miss and Jihad Carter from Syracuse. I think we will be sitting here at the end of the year, if things go the way we hope, crediting that as a big reason why they did what they did. Those are real players now. Igbinosun as a prospect might be the best prospect in the secondary right now. I think I can make a son.
I don't remember seeing a corner when we walked into the Woody last Tuesday, a corner that looks like Igbinosun. He's legit 6. I think they have him listed at 6'2".
And he is probably 6'2". 6'1".
Yeah,
6'2" is no one's really 6'2". No, but he's like 6'1.5". I mean, he's not 6 foot.
No.
Sorry.
And he just stood out among the other cornerbacks. And look, I've seen a lot of Ohio State talented cornerbacks that went off to the league, and they're your stereotypical smaller guy, not smaller, but smaller in comparison. He is a guy, and he played in the SEC last year. Like, you've got a guy with experience, with the size. Now, he was in the transfer portal for a reason. Maybe it was because he wanted more playing time. Well, I assume at some point this spring we'll get a chance to talk to him about that. But this is a guy that, at least right now, just walking in, passing the eye test, and then you watch the film, and there's good stuff there. So I completely agree with you on him. I think Jihad Carter, he gives you something different than what you had last year with Tanner McCalister. Absolutely, I think they upgraded at both positions there. Now you've got, between Denzel Burke, Jordan Hancock, and Igbinosun, I think you have 3 legitimate cornerbacks if Denzel Burke can get back to playing how he was his freshman year, being healthy and whatnot. And if Jordan Hancock can become what they think he can, you've got 3 guys there. The depth behind them is not great, and guys will have to develop, but that's a lot better place than I think you left the season thinking you might be in, because you landed somebody like that.
Yeah, he was not at Ole Miss because he was under-recruited, or, that sometimes you say, oh, Ole Miss. Ohio State rarely competes in the transfer portal for players who go to Ole Miss. He was the number 1 player in the state of New Jersey from Union High School, which is high quality football routinely for years. A big school state championship type squad. And he went to Ole Miss basically to follow his high school, one of his high school coaches, and Chris Patridge. We all remember that name. And I've said this before, what's funny is Igbinosun was going to transfer because Patridge was going to leave, and Igbinosun was choosing between Ohio State and Michigan. And thankfully, Patridge chose Michigan after Igbinosun chose Ohio State. So we are lucky he was not put through that. And Carter, to me, maybe not quite as talented, but super experienced playmaker that was the leader of a secondary. And in terms of stepping in seamlessly, anyone who has been reliant on freshmen knows it just helps to be 21, 22 years old back there in terms of leadership, physicality, etc. Let's talk the obvious, and we are legally obligated to discuss the Devin Brown, Kyle McCord, or the Kyle McCord, Devin Brown. I don't want anyone taking anything out of who was mentioned first. Just your thoughts on the whole thing. Like we said, it's going to be harder to get real information out about this than it is to, get into Fort Knox, because they don't want either one of these guys to leave. I don't think, in my opinion, Dan's opinion, that they're completely sold on who it is yet. I'm sure every guy there in charge has a vibe. What's your thought? How they looked, how they acted, and what can people expect when they get back on the field in a week?
I think both have had, from the 2 kind of viewing windows we've been allowed to see, both have had positive moments. Now, look, this is them throwing on air to, not even their full complement of receivers, because the guys that are out and were there for 30 minutes. So let's take it at face value there. But I've seen some good throws from both guys. I've seen some guys, Kyle McCord had one throw the first day we were there that I was like, ooh, that was not good. But then he came right back the next play and made a nice throw. I forget who the receiver was. Same with Devin Brown. There's been some inconsistency. It was the first day of spring practice. So I think both guys have the right mentality. We talked to both quarterbacks already. I really like the way they handle themselves. Kyle McCord, Dave and I talked about this on the happy hour after that first spring practice. Kyle McCord brings a very serious nature to it. You can tell he's very businesslike in his approach, at least with us. Devin Brown is still a bit more, he shows his personality a bit more. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer with that. You can watch the videos. We've got them on our YouTube page on Bucknuts. Look, I don't know how you go wrong here. Now, obviously you can, and if they do, that's going to be a problem. But both of these guys are talented. They let you do a little bit different things. I know the mobility continues to be something that comes up when you talk about Kyle McCord and does he have what they need? I think he certainly can do what CJ Stroud did in the bowl game and just pick up some yards when you need them. maybe not run for 70 yards, but get what you need. And he does seem to be a bit more willing to do that. Devin Brown will certainly give you that. And I think he's got an accurate arm. It's maybe not quite as explosive as Kyle McCord's. So you've got a nice little balance here, depending on what you want to do. I think leadership is going to be a big thing. That's not something we're going to see a ton of, but that's something that Ryan Day's already brought up a couple times that he's going to have, whoever this is going to have to lead this entire team. And Kyle McCord's had more experience, but I also like what we've seen from Devin Brown when he's had those opportunities. He talked about when CJ Stroud was at the Heisman last year, trying to step up and be more of a leader as well. So I think both guys have the ability. I think both guys have the temperament. It's going to be a fun battle, and we'll get a bigger sample size here as we go through. But I'm not ready to pick anyone. Steve and I had a debate over the weekend. Steve is like, how do you not start Devin Brown, or how do you not start Kyle McCord, because Devin Brown probably won't leave? And I was like, I don't know if you think that way. Like, I think you just have to get the guy who's the best guy and get him out there and worry about what happens later. We'll see how it plays out, though, for sure.
It's super interesting to me because they can't mess around. Like they also keep in mind, we got to keep wide receiver U going here. Yeah. You got to pick the guy who can get the ball to these guys so they can be picked, 3rd and 15th overall next year. And Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka. And lest we forget, Marvin Harrison Jr. and Kyle McCord played together in high school.
Pretty well. That worked out well.
They were decent. Pretty fun to face them on Friday night. We definitely have the Harrison flu. So I wonder if that plays any role into it. I'm not saying that, that it really does, but I would think that Marvin and Kyle should have a certain rapport together. And when in doubt, he'll know who to throw it to. I know I would. Let's actually finish with some NFL chatter. People want to talk about Justin Fields. And I would just like to say this. There are people who think Justin Fields is a running quarterback still. And I just wonder if those people had access to cable television when he was in college. Justin Fields' junior year here, he threw 41 touchdown passes, 3 interceptions, 2 of which were blatantly not his fault. One of which the coach took the blame for, and one of which, let's just face it, Olave turned the wrong way in the end zone. I think it was a Chris. 41-3. That's not an option quarterback. He's doing that. He did, and then the next year was similar. Remember, his senior year, we were afraid for him ever to carry the football, lest Gunnar Hoke would get in there and take the controls. So I don't understand that when they talk about him. And just to give you an understanding of how bad the Bears were and are at receiver, DJ Moore was just traded for you. You know that. DJ Moore has more career receiving yards than any wide receiver in Chicago Bears history already. DJ Moore just got here. I mean, that is a terrible setup. He had the worst stuff. He was running for his life.
Yeah.
I really don't understand. And it's almost like I didn't understand why it took so long for everyone to come around to CJ being the number one guy. And then I start to feel like I'm a total homer. What's my problem? Tell me, help me out. Why am I a homer? Or are these people just clueless?
No, I agree. Look, I mean, if you've only watched the NFL and that's all you know of Justin Fields, then I guess you would think he's a running quarterback because he's had to do a lot of it. But as you mentioned, he's had to do it. That's how they've been able to do anything, and they still aren't winning games doing it. So you need to get him weapons. You need to protect him, though. And, hopefully that's what they'll do with, I think they got the number 9 pick in that trade over the weekend. Hopefully you go in there, you get him maybe a Paris Johnson Jr. Get an offensive. Yeah. One of these offensive linemen. You got to get this guy help. Give him time. I know the NFL and college, it's a different level, but you saw, as you mentioned the numbers, but just watching him in college, I mean, he's not CJ Stroud in terms of wanting to stay in the pocket, but it's not like he was Braxton Miller early in Braxton Miller's career either. So look, get him another weapon or two. I know they traded for
DJ Moore. That helps.
Yeah, you've got the receiver from Pittsburgh who they traded for last year.
Chase Claypool.
Who's a fine player. Get him an offensive line. Build that thing in the right way, and don't just make him run for his life because we've already seen him be hurt a couple times. It's just been a bad situation in Chicago. Look at how the Bengals have done with Joe Burrow. If you're a team right now in the NFL and you've got a young quarterback, obviously they've hit the jackpot with those 3 receivers, but look at how they've built it there and follow that blueprint. I think that's a perfect situation because you went from a team that was drafting number 1 overall and you figured a way to get to the Super Bowl and then get back to the AFC Championship game by building around your young quarterback and giving him exactly what he needs.
I think more than anything I've learned about the NFL recently is double down on what you're good on.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're good at, if you have a good passing game, get another receiver. The idea of filling holes and that kind of trying to be good at everything, I don't think you can do that in the NFL anymore. I'm not even kidding when I say this. If they pick Jackson Smith and Jigba at number 9, that would be a tremendous pick for them. I realize you've got to protect them, and I don't know enough about their offensive line, the depth, yada, 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 and how to do that. But the idea of just overwhelming now people with talent, skill-wise, that he didn't have before, I love that idea. I'm a Cowboys fan. I want them. They franchise Tony Pollard. I want them to release Zeke and pick Bijan Robinson. Then you've got the best running back rotation in the league. You know what I'm saying? You have a chance to do something with it. Look how good the people are at the NFL, at the Super Bowl level, at what they do best. Like you mentioned, Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd. That's impossible to stop when you have a good running back. The Chiefs are built around arguably the best tight end quarterback combo of all time with great. You got to do something exceptional. It's not good. And I do think there is no doubt in my mind with the splash plays and the fact that Chicago is that market. If the Bears started out 6-0, you were going to have like banners on buses with Fields for MVP. He's got that kind of talent. So all the haters need to just Google his high school career, his college. I went back and looked at his stats to make sure I wasn't insane. 41-3. And the first one, I've never covered a team where after the guy's first interception, the coach comes out and blatantly says that was my fault. And Day did that. So we will leave you with that. I probably talked too much today. Who knows? Dave will not even be back tomorrow, so you're going to have to hear more of me. I don't even know who my guest is going to be yet. Maybe it'll be Pat again, and he will get no overtime. Bucknutters, have a good one.